gorgeous. Then we headed over to Seward and Kenai Fjords National Park, back to Anchorage, and then we went home. So it was a pretty whirlwind trip, and I'll talk more about that through there. First, the way we started our trip, after we arrived in Anchorage, our motor coach took us to beautiful downtown Talkeetna. This is where you hop on to get onto the Wilderness Express train. So if you don't want to drive to Denali, you can take a train to Denali. And this train is super cool. You kind of hang out in downtown Talkeetna till the train arrives. There's like lots of really cute little coffee shops and like lovely little signs to put your face in with your family if you want. So we just kind of hung out in Talkeetna until the train arrived. Then we hopped on the Wilderness Express and started enjoying the beautiful scenery of Alaska. So the great thing about this train, it's one of those lovely ones with the windows all the way across. So the whole entire drive, you're just enjoying the scenery of Alaska while you have your own personal guide kind of like narrating the whole time around. You can get some alcoholic drinks while you're there too, so that's pretty nice. Below where you sit is actually where you eat as well. So they also feed you an actual meal. I believe for us it was lunchtime. So the Wilderness Express, great experience. If you are someone who gets a little train sick, definitely recommend sitting forward when you're in the eating portion, but it was pretty cool to be in a train car that was both the dining car and the car that you would sit in. So this was kind of how we made our way to Denali. Our poor motor coach driver basically drove along the highway alongside where we were on the train, and then he met us there to take us to stay at the Denali Park Village. For context, this trip was at the end of May. So we took the very first trip that was available. So we were like right at the start of the tourist season for Alaska. And you might be able to see my little timestamp down here. This photo was taken at 9:36 p.m. This was when I realized that sleeping was going to be different, and then I was going to have to force myself to go to sleep. It was actually a problem. My brother and I often stayed up until 11 because it was still light out. So we just like didn't get tired. We were just following the sun. So the closer you get to that summer solstice, the more you have midnight sun there, but that's also kind of like a fun part of vacationing that time of year in Alaska. So after we settled in for the night, enjoyed the river that was right behind our rooms. The next day, we had a full day with naturalists from Alaska Geographic. Alaska Geographic works through quite a few of the national parks in Alaska, and we essentially had a full day with them. There are bus tours that you can take throughout Denali. There is a road in Denali, but you can only go so far in your own vehicle. After that, you can only proceed forward in one of the tour buses. So we were there with Alaska Geographic. They essentially do what Craig and I do, just in Alaska. So they're taking people around, they're explaining the environment, they're showing us examples of knowing whether or not a moose has been there. There was in fact one spot where we were hiking along and then they were like, we're gonna turn around. And we had to just completely go back the other way because there was a mama moose with her baby ahead, and they were like, we're not gonna get trampled today. So that was very helpful because I did not see the moose at all. I like barely understood what they were pointing at. So it was very helpful to have trained naturalists with us. This was one of our naturalists here with awesome ponytail. They took us to see braided rivers throughout Denali. And one thing I really loved about being with naturalists is having somebody like explain to me, why does this river look this way? Like if you can see here, there's this dark band on one side and this lighter portion here. To be able to have a naturalist say, like, this banded river is two rivers coming together, and the darker one you see is from a non-glaciated river. So it is clear, whereas this one that's on the right side, like that's all glacial silt. So like without having a naturalist with me, I would have not known that at all. And to be able to like point out different plants and things in the area was just like so good. And it was so fun to nerd out with other naturalists just from a different part of our country. So super great day with them. They even had us do like different activities in their classrooms, the same kinds of activities that Craig and I do, which meant my group had an upper hand, and yes, we won. So I was happy to help them out. They said we were very lucky. So this is a zoomed in photo, just so you know. So I did take that one with my camera. On our hike, we were very lucky to kind of come across like 8 caribou that were in a stream, and they were basically like, you guys are really lucky. This usually doesn't happen. So we got to see quite a few caribou. And then this one here, this is a video from the bus we were in. So I'm going to hit play on that so you can see what friend kind of walked by us there. But just had a really lovely up close and personal. I never would have been able to get that close to a moose in the wild. Like, it was literally just because we were in the bus. Like, just a big old guy. So yeah, any photos you see like this throughout the presentation, those are ones that are probably really zoomed in. So there'll be some later of other animals. But yeah, so great. Denali is known for Dall sheep. We looked for Dall sheep a lot. Dall sheep are kind of hard because they also just look like partially melted snow. So I was not able to get any photos of Dall sheep, but usually it was when we were in the bus and they were like, you see that white dot all the way up there on that mountain? That's a Dall sheep. And you're just kind of like, okay, I trust you. But Denali was actually established as like a preserve partially for Dall sheep. So that's kind of the history behind why that area was preserved. And if you didn't know, Denali, which is the peak for which the park is named for, is the highest peak in North America. And it stands for the tall one in Athabascan, which is a native language in Alaska. So super cool park. Only about like 20 to 30% of the people who visit actually get to see the peak of Denali because it's usually shrouded in like mist and clouds. We were very lucky. We were able to see it when we were leaving. And we were on the highway going away, and our bus driver stopped and we all got out and like took a photo of it. I could not find my photo of it, but yeah, we were part of that part. Our second day in Denali, we did do another hike. This was like a 100-year-old beaver dam. As you can see, they were working really hard. But this was just like a lovely hike that was within walking distance of where we were staying. So all we really had to do was cross the road and hop on our hiking trail, which was great. If you're a fan of Into the Wild, does anyone see? Okay. And you want to see a Christopher McCandless bus, this is at a brewery not too far away from Denali. It's really close by. This is not the bus that Christopher McCandless died in, but this is the bus that they did use in the movie Into the Wild. And so you can go in the bus and have a pint of beer. This here was a pine soda. That I got. The brewery is called 49th State Brewing Company. They got a lovely outdoor space, great food. But this is really close to Denali. So if you wanna recreate the Christopher McCandless picture like I did, you can do that there. And then before we left Denali, also nearby is the Husky Homestead, which is super cool. They are a group of people who train to race in the Iditarod. So these are this is actually a woman who's been racing year after year in the Iditarod. She was showing us all the clothes that she wears when she goes, how they stand on the sled. And then this is a video of one of the many ways they help train the dogs during the summertime, because they are always in training season, so they were kind of showing us what summer training looks like. But it's like a dog hamster wheel. And if you may have been able to see, but he's actually holding a brake. He's like slowing the dog down. The dog wants to run really fast. But yeah, Husky Homestead was so cool. This is Jeff King. Jeff King has won the Iditarod 4 times, and he's actually the oldest person to have ever, like, he completed it at age 50, so he won at age 50. So he's the oldest person to complete the Iditarod. And in the 35 years of him being a musher, he's logged 150,000 miles on a dog sled. This guy is like a huge celebrity in Alaska. our tour guide was like, you guys don't understand, we get to meet Jeff King. So that was really cool to be able to meet him and him to bring around the dogs to us and just really see how much the dogs love running. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, when you hop off the bus, they just put puppies in your hand. This is a part of their training for the dogs, is they need to socialize them with multiple people. Because if you think about it, a dog that's going to be in a sled race like the Iditarod is going to need to be comfortable being around lots of different people. So having tours come actually kind of helps them socialize the puppies so that they get comfortable being around lots of different people. These are Alaskan Huskies, which are different than other kinds of Huskies. They're not an officially recognized breed by like the American Kennel Club. They're a mixture of a whole bunch of other dogs. So when you like pet them, their fur like feels different. You're like, yeah, you're meant to be like running in the snow. You're definitely built different, as the kids say. Also a part of their training is they have this treadmill that they use in the summertime with the dogs. So of course I took a video of it so you could see it. If you can hear this video, you will notice all the other dogs who are not on the sled treadmill want to be on the sled treadmill. And so you'll see them like running around and like jumping because they're like, my turn, my turn, my turn. But yeah, they're like, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. And that's how it was the entire time. Like anytime a dog got to run, all the other dogs were like, when is it my turn?
They all got exercise.
Yeah, they all get exercise, exactly. But yeah, so the guy who's over here helping train the dog, he's on an ATV. And they ran for a little bit on the treadmill, and then eventually they just went off the treadmill and did a like ATV run around the property. So when it's not winter time, they're still training these dogs, just in something that looks a little bit less like a dog sled. So that was a really great experience to have. It was not one I was expecting to have, so it was a really lovely surprise. Then we headed to Kennecott after we were done in the Denali area. Between Kennecott and Denali, there is the Denali Highway, which is this red line. This is a highway that's only open in the wintertime. So if you were like gonna go on a road trip, you could only access this in the, sorry, it's not only open, it's closed in the wintertime. You can only access it during the warm months. But like gorgeous views. And you get to see all of these mountains and glaciers while you're driving across, and there's multiple areas where you can stop along the way. McLaren Summit is on this highway. McLaren Summit is the second highest mountain pass in Alaska. So you get up there and there's just like really good views all the way around. And you can see everyone just like smacks their stickers on the sign there to be like, I was here. So like a nice, fun way. A lot of tour companies don't take you through it, according to our bus driver, because it's annoying to drive in a big bus on a partially gravel road. There are parts of it that are not like paved, it's just gravel. And our tour guide let us know she's the coolest Alaskan person I have ever met. She would drive out to this road and then get on trailheads with her friends, and they would go backpacking off of this highway. So cool place to get to a lot of other places. And then once we got closer to Kennecott, it was time for us to go on one of these lovely little planes to get to our second national park. So we took Wrangell Mountain Air. I did not go, this is like a 2-seater. We went in like 4-seater, 6-seater planes. I am someone who does get plane sick, so that was the main thing I was worried about before we went on our trip, was how am I gonna handle going in one of those little tiny planes? I did pretty good. I basically was just like eating ginger chews the entire time. So I just packed a whole bunch of ginger chews for my trip. Once we were up there, it was pretty cool. This looks like fog. But the way that the flights worked is they only had so many planes, and then we had like double the amount of people than the planes they had for, so we kind of like went and explored a different area while the first group went, and so I was on the second group. So I was able to know that all of this was actually glacial silt that was being drummed up from all these rivers that were converging near where we started. So then when we got up in the air, you get to see like the beautiful landscapes all around us. And kind of like old, you can even see here, old log mining roads get filled in with trees, and then you get to see like these more pronounced lines on the landscape, which was super cool. They did not take us the fastest route to where we were going, which was McCarthy. They actually took us past Mount Blackburn, which is the tallest mountain in the Wrangell mountain range. So that was really cool to like be at the level of the peak of the tallest mountains in that range. It was just like very awe-inspiring, despite the little bit of nausea along the way from every time the plane went like this. But super cool. We landed in McCarthy. This is sort of like, these are some glacial pools. And when we landed, we were inside of the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Now that is the largest national park in the country. It is about 6 Yellowstones. So if you had 6 Yellowstones worth of land, then you would have the size of Wrangell St. Elias National Park. This park has 4 different mountain ranges throughout it, so they all kind of like converge in this one area. Here you can kind of see the general area. We were at the point of landing in McCarthy, which is a small town outside of Kennecott, which is where we were staying. You can see here, this is the Kennecott Glacier right there. And right here is the Root Glacier. And that was the glacier we ended up hiking the next day. You might, I don't think you can see it, but there's a little tiny town right there, and that's where we stayed. But so many assumptions about glaciers were like broken for me in this trip. Like I had so many ideas of what glaciers were like and what they looked like and what it felt like to be on a glacier from like all the nature programs I looked at. But like this experience definitely changed it. Like all of this dirt is glacier. Like this is all, if you look really close where there's that white there, there's ice under there. And this is all just the sediment that the glacier pushes out and pushes around as it moves across the landscape and basically carves its way. When I would think, I was like, this must be really hot. But we did learn that if the dirt amount on top of the ice is 6 inches or more, it actually helps insulate the glacier and keep it from melting. If it is less than 6 inches, it will melt the glacier more. So just like really interesting things I never knew about glaciers. And it started here when we were flying in. I was like, that's not what I expected a glacier to look like, but there it is. Super beautiful. This is from the lodge we stayed at. So there was only one lodge in Kennecott, and it's called the Kennecott Lodge. There are a few other places you can stay too. They're just a bit more rugged. But Kennecott Lodge was great. Example of how expensive why it's so expensive to go to Alaska. The owner of the lodge has his own plane that he flies to another city to pick up the food that he then personally flies back to the lodge. So like that's a really long grocery trip for the food, and the food's amazing there too. Like it was very, very good. But this was like what we woke up and saw every morning while we were there in Kennecott. Like just absolutely gorgeous. I'm definitely biased. This was definitely my favorite park in the trip. But after we arrived, we then like kind of had a nice meal at the lodge. Next day, woke up, hiked a glacier. This was really cool. It's a pretty accessible glacier hike. The National Park Service rates this hike as easy to moderate. There's not a ton of elevation change. It's 4 miles round trip, and you can make that longer if you want to. Like I wanted to make it longer, but I was with a group. We went with the St. Elias Alpine Guides. They were super cool because we had about 20 people in our group. So we were essentially assigned 4 guides. And then as our group hiked and people's hiking speeds became known, the guides just kind of stayed with groups of like 4 to 5. So like, my brother has insanely long legs, and he was hiking with me the whole time. We were in the front group because he had really, really long legs, which you can see him here with the rock that they called Dwayne for Dwayne The Rock Johnson. But our lovely guide Kelsey here was fearlessly leading us past Donahue Peak, which is right here. It's right in between our Kennecott Glacier that's there and the Root Glacier, which is the glacier we went on. And you might see it, but it looks a little bit like a crocodile. coming out of the water. So super cool. When you do glacier hiking, you want to dress for the temperature, gloves are required, sunglasses are required, crampons are required. Our St. Elias guides provided the crampons. So before we even started our hike, they sized all of us with crampons, which are essentially like big ice walk-in picks for your feet. It is really easy to trip on the glacier, so you do have to be kind of like careful, but the crampons really help. Sunglasses just because the glare is really horrible, and the gloves is if you fall on the glacier, because like the ice is really sharp. We had one person fall in our group, and she did get like scratched up. So definitely take your layers off too, because I didn't take my layers off, and then once I got on the glacier, because the hike was around like 50 degrees, so it wasn't like super cold that day, but once I got on the glacier and like all the lovely wind was coming off of the glacier and I was sweaty, just like cooled me down in a way I did not want to be cooled down. But the Root Glacier is super cool. It has this thing called the Stairway Icefall that's like way far away. This looks closer than it actually is, but people for scale over here, for kind of the photo, that Stairway Icefall is over 6,000 feet tall, and it's some sources that I found said it's the second tallest icefall outside of the Himalayas. So it is like, if anyone's like a Game of Thrones fan, it like makes you think of the Northern Wall in Game of Thrones, like just a giant ice. But super cool, highly recommend it. There's a little glacial pool like in this divot here that you can't see. Our guides did let us know that some people will like take all their clothes off and go for a swim, and that's apparently allowed. So if you feel like doing that, just know this is a place where you can do it. But yeah, super cool. There were plenty of people that went farther than us. So there was a whole another like arc here, and people were going past us further onto the glacier. But the Root Glacier hike was, I was worried it was gonna be really tough for me, and it ended up being pretty reasonable. And we had, I think me and my brother were the youngest people on the hike. Most people who came in our group were retired. So they were doing all of their fun trips to do once they didn't have to have a job anymore to hold them back. And basically everyone was able to touch the glacier. So not everyone went up onto the glacier. We were able to get up and like have our lunch on the glacier. Some of the other folks in our group, they just had the lunch kind of at the foot of the glacier, but then kind of went on the lower part of it. So yeah, super awesome. And then our second day, our guides also took us to this mining area. So Kennecott was originally a mining town. So I have a video to show you because it's much easier than me trying to explain all of it, because this can show you visuals that I do not have from my own trip.
Kennecott was the eastern United States, planted right into the middle of the Alaska territorial building. They brought in electricity, they brought in running water, they brought in steam heat into Kennecott, they brought in creature comforts that had never existed before. 1910 until 1938, an entire small civilization existed on the south coast of the Wrangell. Came into existence because there was a demand for copper. At the time, it's what energized America. We needed copper wire, millions of miles of copper wire.
We were just starting electricity and telephones, in the early 1900s, so there was a lot of demand for copper. They saw what they thought were green fields up there on the mountain above the current mill, and that turned out it was outcroppings of pure copper. And this was extremely rich copper, so it was a big deal. Basically started with the interior of Alaska, put them on the map.
The town of Kennecott was a really prolific copper mine. Actually, they ended up with 600,000 tons of finished metal. The effective years were from 1911 through 1938. This is definitely a really remote location. The challenges of building and operating a mine out here seem really tremendous, even from a modern perspective. much less 100 years ago. This location was vital, though.
So those are the barracks where they would stay when they worked in the mines that you see up on the hill.
In barracks up at the mines, they would rarely have a chance to come off of those for often weeks and months at a time. They would stay working. The mines that served the mill at Kennecott were right at the freezing temperature all the time. They were relatively safe because they were mines. You were working underground every day, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month. The typical shift was 10 hours. Although conditions were noted as being harsh up in the mines relative to other mines almost anywhere in Alaska and a lot of places stateside, they were relatively good because Kennecott ran a fairly safe, efficient operation.
Erie mines, it's way up on top of the mountains there, and the Erie miners, they would shovel coal in the daytime, and they had weightlifting up there at night. So these guys had arms like our legs, you know. These guys were some hardy people, so they lived up there on the edge of that glacier, and very few times did they ever come down into Kennecott itself. At the time when the mill was going at full speed, there was like 1,800 people here, so it was one of the highest populated areas in the entire northern sector, to include Canada too. It was a bustling community for sure.
You know, there's a lot of hardships involved in working in a mine like that. It wasn't a safe place to work, right? But they had a nice community there, and a lot of the people that lived there, you know, they had big social events and ice skated in the winter.
This was the recreation hall for the workers. Notably, they would have dances here, too. Although given the preponderance of single male miners and very few single female teachers and nurses, it's probably pretty awkward dances with definite shortage of female partners.
In reading the interviews of people that had actually lived at Kennecott in the 1920s, a lot of them actually said that the best years of their life was living in Kennecott. Brought in a new group of people, what I call the early hippie, place to escape through the snow work out there or anything. But people wanted a remote existence, they got one out there.
There was only one cable across the river here, and it was a very small basket, about that big. So you had to make your way over to that basket and throw your legs up on it, and then get on that basket and go across. They would push it back, and obviously it made it inaccessible to get in here. But we went up to Kennecott, and we had the entire complex to ourselves. It was a completely different place at that time. There wasn't anybody here.
We came down here and, man, we get to the end of the road and look at that ice ball and all that. It's like, wow. And yeah, I decided to hang out here for a while and ended up buying property and staying for 40 plus years.
Living out here is an adventure. Everything's in its natural state here. There's no rat race. I forget what day of the month it is. I don't care when I'm out here. You're just living.
You know, you're close to God. It's hard to deny God when you're living in the middle of the wilderness in Alaska.
History is not considered very important anymore. It's kind of downgraded, but it's the context of what we are. The real America that we know today had its roots with the Industrial Revolution, and Kennecott is a part of that.
Yeah, so where do we go? There we go. So the rest of our time at Kennecott, has anyone heard the Wrangell Mountain Song, by the way? I can't remember who does it. Anyways, if you look up Wrangell Mountain Song, they're basically just going through the old mining refinery and like having a good old time. You know how they're talking about the hippie days? Well, there's at least one music video from that time where they're literally just running around this whole like mining installation and like having fun. But so they will take you in. This is basically where they did the refining process of the copper. So shipping copper from the middle of nowhere, Alaska to other places was going to be really expensive. So they basically refined it as much as possible before it was leaving the Wrangell Mountains. So then the money they were spending on the rail to get it out was money well spent. And really that rail car, that rail line was the only way in and out, which is also why we had to fly in, because the road is only like as wide as a railroad. So that is why we had to fly in. Our tour bus would have not been able to get to where we were staying. There are about 3 or 4 narrow passes you have to go through with your vehicle. And if you have a vehicle that's too large, you just like can't get to Wrangell St. Elias National Park, at least this area of it. So important thing to note. But we did get to explore the refining parts. As you can see down here, it's a little bit, we had to sign lots of waivers for our tour. Mainly because like a few of the rocks too, like had things in them that you don't necessarily want to touch. So there were a few signs saying like, hey, don't like pick up rocks and take them home because they've gone through copper refining and it might not be bad for you. But like right when you get in, they've made this platform that you see over here that is what you walk on. So they've like reinforced certain areas of the tour, but this is really like a building in disrepair. And essentially the National Park Service right now is slowly rehabbing different parts of it, but they also want to honor the fact that like this is not, they're not going to try to spiff it up and make it look exactly how it did the day it was built. Like they want to make it safe, but also reflective of the old age of the building. But super cool because you start all the way up on the very top of like the side of a mountain essentially, and then as you go through the refining process and the copper is getting more and more refined, you're like going down the side of the mountain just by the nature of how it sits on the hill, which is pretty cool. Our guides were the same guides that took us on the glacier. So St. Elias Alpine guides were also our guides through the building. There's just a ridiculous number of shaking tables, which is what you see here. So like the copper would be on one side and then it would like shake off different debris that they didn't want, and so copper would go to one side, everything else would go to the other. So that you see there. My engineer dad loved this place. Like just seeing how everything worked, getting the explanation from our guides of how each of the processes worked, being able to look out the windows and see the landscape that they would be able to see as like someone who was refining copper. Not so great is that like they were just exposed to Alaskan temperatures while they were doing it. So like they didn't heat this place. The only place they heated was where people were doing fine work with their hands, and even so they were like they only heated it to like 45 degrees. So like just enough that your hands can still work, which I was like, that doesn't sound real fun. But it was like a really incredible tour, and learning about the town and like how they stayed productive. They virtually had no sickness in this mining town, mainly because they had an isolation protocol that if you left the town and you came back, you had to stay in McCarthy and you were not allowed to come into Kennecott until you passed a 2-week isolation period. So like it was a pretty healthy mining town because of those kinds of rules that they put in place. You may have seen on the video the like carts that were on like basically lines that would have come down. The men would like ride those back when they were done with their time up in the mines. They would like take the carts that had the copper in it and like ride them down to this building to be like, I'm done with my shift. So like dudes would sometimes get injured doing that. Not exactly the safest. But they did let us know that the mine work was kind of nice because it was at least warmer than when they were refining the copper. Because if you're like in the earth mining, you're like in a place that has a relatively stable, warmer habitat than like here where they're doing work with their hands and refining copper. So that was really interesting. So that was sort of like, we sort of had the fun like glacier nature learning side of our time at Kennecott, and then we also had the historical side with learning about the copper mining. And then it was time for us to leave to go to another national park. This was a slightly bigger plane. As a person who gets a little bit flight sick, bigger plane, better. Better. Less drops, less uncomfortable stomachs. It also helps they didn't take us on the same flight path. So the first flight path they took us through, I believe it's called the 4th of July Pass because somebody went through it at the 4th of July. And that one like takes you up in the mountains. So I think just the air is a little bit less stable there. The path they took us on the way home basically like stayed over a valley and was like super chill the whole time. But also larger plane. So that was really great. Goodbye, glaciers. And then we needed to travel to the coast to get to our 3rd national park. On the way, this is when we stayed in the Mat-Su Valley, which is this photo here, taken at 10:37 p.m. So that was our view outside of our hotel room. So basically just like a lot of driving to get from Wrangell closer to the coast. On the way, we did pass the Alaska Wildlife Center, so we were able to see a lot of the animals that we could only see really far away at Denali up close. So they had like all the bears that you find in Alaska. They had musk oxen there, which if you are a fiber artist or you crochet or knit, their fiber is highly sought after. And there are places that you can buy the fiber in Alaska, should you desire to do so. So you're able to see those there, along with like just like a lot of other animals. We also passed more glaciers on the way, because you know, you're driving through Alaska. There's just glaciers everywhere. Wrangell St. Elias, where we were before, does have the most glaciers out of any national park. About 25% of the land is glaciated, and there's something like over 3,000 glaciers in that entire national park. So if you want to see glaciers, go to Alaska. So finally we made it to Seward, which is the city that's on the coast. This is where Kenai Fjords National Park is. About 50% of Kenai Fjords, I believe, is ice. Yep, is covered by ice, and a lot of those glaciers come right up to the fjord that it is in, which is why boat tours are really common there. So we did take a boat tour at Kenai Fjords, where they brought us like right up to different glaciers, and then they were able to take us to different areas to see sea life. So this was a great opportunity to bring out a camera, especially if you were a birder. Like lots of birders go and visit Kenai Fjords to be able to see all the seabirds there. So we did do a boat tour. The boat tours were super cool because all of the captains of all the boats are talking to each other. They're talking to each other and they're letting everyone know where different wildlife have been seen. So we were able to see lots of wildlife on our tour, like orca pods. At one point we got to watch the orcas like trying to hunt some seals. I do not recall that they were successful, but like lots of opportunities to see orcas. Our ship captain even like brought us into this cove where we were then just like surrounded by nesting bird species around us, and being able to like see them fly over us was super cool. And then we got to see a little puffin. When I was in Northern Ireland, I really wanted to see a puffin, and I never got to see any. And then I got a picture of this little guy, just all the way up on the little face, and I was like, yes. So he's a little horned puffin, named for this little boop over his eye. So super cute. We also got to see one sea otter right as we were coming out of port. He was just like, I'm just hanging out. He was just like in the middle of the port where all the boats go by, and we were like, okay, dude. Super adorable. Also a glacier too. So lots of glaciers, lots of wildlife. So there were lots of seals, especially once we got closer to the glaciers, and kind of the like waterways that were fed by glaciers. You could see the glacier kind of like breaking apart in front of you, which is pretty crazy. But super cool. And then we headed back to Anchorage. This is the Cook Inlet. The Cook Inlet's interesting because they have a really crazy like tidal experience where the water goes out and then it comes back really fast. If you watch Spooky Lake Month did an episode on Cook Inlet. It can be pretty dangerous because of these mud flats you see here. But I was actually able to get a tile made from the mud of Cook Inlet. So if you would like to touch the mud from Cook Inlet, I brought this for you. This will relate to my next slide, which is a place we visited in in Anchorage, sorry, and that is the Alaska Native Heritage Center. So in about, I think it was 1971, they created the Alaska Native Regional Corporations, which is essentially where they gave a bunch of land and financial money to the Native American tribes of Alaska. So you can sort of think about this as sort of like a reparations in a way. But all of the tribes, which you can kind of see the different color regions here, kind of represent the different tribal areas in Alaska. All of them were able to form corporations that they then used to start businesses, acquire land for their people, but then also established this Alaska Native Heritage Center, which was super cool. You got to go through and see all of the traditional housing that these different tribes use. So like tribes that would have been in the more, or are in the more rainforested area of Alaska have a completely different housing structure than those in other parts of Alaska. And like we were able to talk to people from those tribes and hear about like how do they keep food safe from bears and just like their native life ways. So that was a really cool experience to be able to have in Anchorage and really see that history of Native American culture from past to present. So that was kind of our last day, was we spent some time there, and then we basically got ready to go home. So it was a very whirlwind of 10 days, and I didn't even show you everything that we did. So there were like other things I didn't mention that were kind of like nestled in here and there. But it was a really quick, great 10 days. I want to go over some of the downsides and upsides for me. So downsides of small group travel, these are all for me. This might not be a downside for you, but they do pick the schedule and the pacing. So for me, the first night we arrived in Denali, they immediately had us go to this very rowdy, but very cool, like theatrical dinner theater, which like, I'm cool with dinner theaters, but like not after a day of traveling, please. It was probably because we were in the front row too. So like if we weren't in the front row, I probably would have tolerated it a little bit better. But so like picking the schedule and the pacing is definitely something that's like not ideal. Can be a downside. You have travel companions. So like you're going with people that you may not know. We were with our family of 4. Sometimes I just don't want to talk to people and I just want to have breakfast by myself. And sometimes the other people on the trip are not there for you. We did have one person on the trip get really sick and then happened to give the sickness to half of the trip. So that wasn't great because like you have one person who's sick, you cannot isolate, you cannot fully isolate from that person. So things to consider if you are also health conscious like me, that might not be something you want to do. For me, I wanted more physical challenges. So it is a trip that was made to be accessible to everyone that was there. So I would have liked to have like bigger hikes to do, and that's more of just like, maybe I'll go back to the Root Glacier and do it again with the Alpine guides on my own, so that I can go further on the glacier. Also, it's like really cost prohibitive. You got to have a lot of money to be able to go to Alaska. Like I mentioned about the guy in his own airplane to get the food out there. I think this trip is the most expensive North American trip on Odyssey International's website. So it's like pretty expensive to do. Really cool because of course they do everything for you. Everything's taken care of. You don't have to worry about planning everything. You don't have to call Wrangell Mountain Air and be like, do you have a tiny plane that you can take me up in to get me to like the national park on time? Your tour guide can make the experience so much better. This is Carrie Lynn. She's amazing. I love her. I texted her before this and I was like, Carrie Lynn, do you have a photo I can have? And she like texted me right back. Carrie Lynn is a native Alaskan. She grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. So she had so much knowledge to provide during during our trip that I never would have gotten if I had a tour guide who was not from Alaska. So we got to learn so much about the ins and outs of what it's like to grow up in Alaska. And like some kids take an airplane to get to school. Like, insane. And to learn, like, what do they do if the kid can't fly in the airplane back home? Like, how do they handle that if you can't get home from school because of the weather? Like, so interesting. And like she was able to tell us how big of a star Jeff King was, and just like really allow us to appreciate like how cool the things were that we were seeing because she grew up there. I also got to ask her fun questions. Like Craig and I were looking up like stuff for hiking for women. Like, do you have to worry about being on your period in like the middle of nowhere where there are like polar bears and black bears and grizzly bears? And I was like, Carrie Lynn, I have a question. I've been wondering about this. And she was like, no, you're fine. Like, I go back country all the time when I'm on my period, and you don't have to worry about it. So like that was really cool to be able to just like ask her questions like that. Also, you can fit a lot in a small amount of time. If I had planned this trip on my own, I would have not been able to fit all of that in 10 days. Like, there's literally no way. The fact that somebody else is driving for you and figuring out what all your meals are gonna be ahead of time, like what restaurant you're gonna go to, what roadhouse, that kind of stuff, like, there's no way I could have done as much in that time. Also, if you're a people person, built-in travel companions. So like that's both a pro and a con. I got to talk to some really cool people who are like scientists and they work in PhD fields, and I got to talk to them about their research, and like that was super cool to have like a new hiking companion to talk about stuff like that, who like I didn't show up with. So that was really great. There's a list of the amazing organizations and people I would totally try to go and see again if I went back to Alaska. So if you want to take a picture of that there, that Wilderness Express train is just that train we took to Denali. Alaska Geographic Naturalists, those are the folks that led our tour at Denali, and there's Alaska Geographic folks in other national parks in Alaska. Husky Homestead, where they had the mushers, all sorts of cool stuff. So with that, thank you. Oh, I can go back. There we go. And then on my next slide, I just have my work phone and email if you want to ask any questions or anything like that. But yeah, that was my Alaska National Park adventure. So thank you for listening.